So I'll just explain who we are and who I am. I'm Bob Campbell from Eurofins Digital Testing. We're a company based in the UK, but we've been involved in conformance testing and the rollout of interactive platforms for many years, HBBTV in Europe and elsewhere around the world. And I'm also co-chair of the Conformance implementation team that ATSC has put together that is looking at the conformance process needed for the successful adoption of ATSC. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why that's so important to its success. And I thought the building in front of us explained that very well. It's built on 52-foot deep foundations that move with the earth, so it's able to move with any tremors, and it's a really strong foundation for that building. So we hope that a conformance program will provide the same sort of foundation for ATSC to be successful. That builds a platform that viewers want to watch, and that also sells TVs, and that broadcasters can make money from. So ATSC is a really complicated system and needs an awful lot of things to come together. It's an open standard in an open market, and there's lots of different vendors all providing equipment and receivers to this market. In advance of all of these being deployed in live services, we need transmission equipment that works together with the receiver equipment and services that are built on top of that are interoperable. So interoperability is the basic foundation. And then we need compliance. We need compliance with the FCC rules. We need compliance with the requirements of DRM and content protection systems. And in a more general sense, the compliance with the specifications. And if you achieve compliance and interoperability, then you get adoption. You get technology that actually delivers what it's supposed to. And very importantly, then viewers will be delighted with the services that you deliver. So then you'll get the situation where a viewer can walk into any store, pick up a TV, and it just works with the services that are available in that area. And if you have widespread adoption and the consumers are delighted, then you get success. ATSC will be successful. So in the previous panel session, there were some discussions about the state of play of receivers, and it's interesting that even then nobody was willing to commit that anything would be on show at CES, and yet there's trials happening. The specs have been done for a while. So why is it? What's holding that up? And fundamentally, it's a chicken and egg problem. We have manufacturers looking for services before they're willing to commit and launch. We have service providers looking for manufacturers to provide TV sets before they're willing to launch services. Manufacturers need test material so they can confidently launch their TVs. And service providers need TVs to test their services and their broadcasts. So we're stuck. Inevitably, both sides are waiting for the other to make progress. The fastest way to unblock this is test material and test tools that both sides can use to build confidence, and these can go faster and be more broad than the trials that are out there that can achieve. There's a lot of challenges in an open platform. In deploying ATSC 3, we've got a lot of things that are going to be different to how we experienced in the past, and a lot of benefits of ATSC are that it's going to address a lot of different devices, that there's a lot of paths to get that content to those devices, and yet that also presents a huge challenge. ATSC service providers also have a lot less control over the capabilities of those parts of the system, and the features and performance that will be achieved by those devices. That creates a much bigger interoperability challenge than we've seen in the past. The testing of such a system doesn't scale if not enabled with tools and materials and automation. We will need to retest at scale a wide range of services, a wide range of devices year after year, and this takes automation to be effective. It also needs this material to be reusable. It needs to be shareable. It needs that everybody plays by the same rules. That means everybody uses it in the same way, everybody sets it up in the same way, the environment's the same, all of that. So what is interoperability? Effectively, things just work. Services are deployed with confidence. You don't have to test every change on every device that exists out there. You don't have to re-go through your service validation on every different model that comes out. Similarly, manufacturers get the economy of scale of a common platform and save money and don't have to retest with every service that's out there. Fundamentally, consumers are happy. They're getting a service that works. They don't complain to their TV or broadcaster, and more importantly, that they have an experience that they expected and they're happy. Also, the platform then allows you to deploy things swiftly to adapt to the market changes that the business is telling you need to make. So you can deploy new business ideas, new models quickly and efficiently because the platform's already there. But we have an interoperability headache, and don't take anything from the brands out here. That this was aimed at a different market, but you get the idea. There are a lot of different models in the first round, and each manufacturer will produce brand models at different levels, aimed at different price points. And once the device hits the market, you start creating a legacy of those devices that need to be managed and dealt with year after year. So then you get the next year's set of brands, and then you get the year after that. And as you get through maybe variations of the spec as well, you can see that very quickly you end up with a real headache of things to try and test and keep up with. We also have to bear in mind that ATSC 3 doesn't exist in a vacuum, and clearly is one of many platforms that is competing for the support of consumers and manufacturers. To be successful in that context, you need to address the difficulties in using that platform. That means making your services compelling and also make it easy to adopt the technology. That means it needs to be as easy as possible for devices to support ATSC, and services need to deliver the experience expected. You need to address interoperability and minimize barriers to adoption. That means testing, plug fests, application service validation, and so on. Also, manufacturers are balancing ensuring their customer is satisfied and also keeping costs low in a hugely competitive market. And unlike the mobile and web world, the TV industry isn't in the habit of updating and rolling out fixes for all of the legacy models out in the market. Even those that go the extra mile are under stiff competition and does inevitably lead to doing sometimes the bare minimum that they feel they have to. Whether they all turn up to trials or to plug fests, some won't, and some will skimp on testing where they think they can. And then this can lead to a kind of lowest common denominator where the support of features and performance is the bare minimum instead of what we need for these services. And we've come across this a lot in our experience in countries where conformance isn't made an important piece of the process of getting a device to market. Then difficulties are created for service providers throughout the market, and in places like France and Germany, where this has happened for HBBTV, it's led to real challenges for service providers. In France, in fact, it even led to the almost complete abandonment of the platform of HBBTV, and they've just tried to relaunch that. And I hope is that France is rethinking how it will go about addressing conformance. It's also true that interoperability is clearly not just the responsibility of manufacturers. And typically, while manufacturers get the blame from consumers when issues arise, they can come anywhere in the system. And the lack of any credible conformance or certification process where blame is simply passed around can lead to manufacturers dropping support of a platform. Again, this does happen, and we've seen this in HBBTV where leading brands have not enabled or even threatened to turn off HBBTV in certain markets due to the poor customer experience they've had to deal with that hits them and their consumers. If you don't validate your services and test them thoroughly, then manufacturers won't necessarily run them and won't carry them. There'll also be a lot of instances where it helps to have validated examples and references to compare, to use as the kind of agreed example that people can point to and say, well, why don't you do it like that? That works, that's tested, we know that works on these devices. And therefore a test case as a reference is also a useful piece of the puzzle. So how to address these problems? We already know there are trial broadcasts. There's been Plugfest taking place. It's great if there can be captures of streams from those events that can be used. They need to also be considered as part of an overall program, and therefore some of the limitations of that can be that the material isn't always licensed for distribution, isn't always able to replicate the real world scenarios that depend on timing and so on. So it's difficult always to achieve interoperability through trials and plugfests alone, and teams of developers and testers need to be able to reproduce those scenarios in their labs year on year, again and again, for each model. Again, for this to be really successful, you can't rely on people bringing their TVs each time round to a plugfest or a trial event every time. So our recommendation as Eurofins is that a test suite is created, and that then test tools are added to that help automate that material and help scale this problem, so that we can meet the ongoing needs of the developers and QA teams. And then on top of that, we need validation tooling and processes for checking the emission side. And around the show, there's quite a few analyzers and verifiers that are out there that verify mainly at the RF level some components of the ATSC signals, and those are needed as well to help make sure that the emission side is conformant. In addition to that, on top of all of those things, we think in time a zoo of devices that's accessible and representative of models in the market could be curated and made available. But again, that's a time sensitive thing. It takes a long while to build that up. It's very costly to manage and operate as well. But all this means in the near term, the real answer is a test suite is more useful than anything else. We need to capture some streams, but we need test material on top of that. And I'll try and explain a little bit of why. So if you imagine an ATSC platform that supports a lot of different features, and you have a service and you test it using that service, you'll test the things that service uses, and then the device that's out there that supports that isn't updated all that frequently and not easily replaced might come across a new service where that stuff hasn't been tested. And clearly there's a risk there that the service that comes later will rely on things that don't work quite as well. If you take those things away and use a test suite, you can test much more thoroughly all of those areas and efficiently cover a bigger space, and then you've protected yourself for the things that the future services will need. A test suite can cover a much broader range than the current known services and the things that we might predict. There's some things that a test suite can do as well where it's really hard to use a recording. especially things that are time sensitive. If you have a service that depends on a DRM license, you need to get that license. It's time critical. It expires after a period, so that needs to be done in a way that's live. A recording can't easily do that. It's really hard to set something up that will use that. There are some other timing constraints and dependencies on third-party systems that are really hard to do with just recordings. The other thing is that then we have a process that verifies this stuff, so it can be used as example material, as I've said before, and it can be verified as correct. It also can be reused. You can reuse example streams across a wide range of scenarios, and then you can automate it. You can simplify the process of running this material, automate setup and configuration of the environment, and then people can rerun them again and again, year after year, time after time. It ultimately simplifies the whole process and creates a lot of efficiencies for everybody. So ATSC has a conformance implementation team. So what's that about? It's formed by ATSC to look into this problem and really scope and plan for a formal regime. What that means is it's planning how things might operate, but it isn't going to operate it itself. It isn't going to do testing. It isn't going to build the tests, but it's trying to come up with a recommendation for how other stakeholders and hopefully other bodies will implement a regime, and as a cross-party, a cross-industry forum, it has representation by broadcasters and manufacturers, and so it's a place where everybody can discuss the approach to testing. It can discuss how that might need to work, and what's in the interests of both sides in this process, and how to efficiently get this done. So we're trying to identify the scope, the what needs to be tested, some of how it ought to be tested, and a lot about how the processes might work, and some of the procedures that might support a program. We're making a recommendation. We made a recommendation to the ATSC board a while ago, and we're waiting now, and we're hoping that other bodies, stakeholders in ATSC, will come forward and operate something. I know CTA are looking at things like this. We believe that, from our perspective, a logo program would be a very great advantage to the adoption of ATSC from receivers, from a receiver perspective, and that's something that we'd like to see as from speaking as Eurofins. The other thing that we can do, and I hope will happen more as things get deployed and as we see more trials come forward, there needs to be a forum by which interoperability issues can be discussed, where the broadcasters and manufacturers can thrash out issues that can't be resolved directly between them, where it affects maybe the specs, where maybe it's unclear what was intended and what the use case needs to be, and all of that. So there's a great need for a place to raise these issues, and then the CIT can direct them into the right group within ATSC or within CTA. So when does this all need to happen? Well, now. It's all needed now. If we work backwards from a 2020 launch, I know, based on manufacturers' development schedules and QA schedules, that a lot of them need to know what the test material looks like now, and they need to be doing testing now, and they need to be able to do it into the second half of this year so that they can get ready for a 2020 launch. That means test material, tools, and so on are urgently required. And really, from my experience, as we've been involved in platforms deploying across Europe, in Asia, and Australia, New Zealand, building this into the process of launch is really important. It needs to be part of that process so that it's part of the rollout, and TVs will support the features from their launch date that you're then going to rely on later. The ultimate aim of this and the goal of all of this is that then consumers pop into a shop and they buy a TV, they get what they expected, they get the benefits that this technology promises, and it's delivered when they turn it on, and they don't get problems when some new service comes down the line and the TV they bought doesn't actually work. What this needs to do is enable interoperability, which is the working of services effectively, and that means maybe gracefully downgrading a service when it discovers a TV doesn't support the features it needs to, but it also doesn't constrain and stifle competition between manufacturers on performance and capabilities of value-added features and optional features. And it's a tricky blend. So a final thing, therefore what we've done as Eurofins is launched here at NAB our test harness and test suite for receivers, to start the ball rolling and to kind of create something for test materials and testing to begin. And really we want to start a dialogue on what that needs to look like and how that needs to evolve in the future. And really that's it. It's ready and it's available now, and that's our stake in the ground for a conformance tool and process. So that's really it. That's all I had to say. Our stand's over in the Futures Park, so please come along and find out more.